Back here on the Rich Eisen Show, the reporter of MMAfighting.com and the host of the MMA Hour podcast, the MMA Beat, is Ariel Helwani. How are you, Ariel?
So here I am coming on your show, Rich, and you're going to take a shot at me in the first 10 seconds?
You know what? You know what?
Jeez Louise.
Here it is. That's just me. That's me working it out, my own anger and angst at the Knicks. And as you know, I keep telling you, just move on, turn the page.
I know.
But you can't.
Honestly, the season ended for me like 2 months ago. Once Porzingis got injured, I haven't been able to watch a game. It's very depressing. So I appreciate you reminding me that they're actually still playing.
My apologies. So let's hit what went down in Brooklyn. What is the headline coming out of UFC 223, Ariel, in your mind?
This is no hyperbole, Rich, but that was the craziest week in the history of the sport, and there's no close second. I'm still having a hard time processing what happened between Thursday around 1:30 p.m. Eastern time and Friday around 8 p.m. because the thing is, there were two gigantic stories happening and unfolding simultaneously, and both were kind of unfolding in the worst way possible for the UFC. So on the one hand, you have the Conor McGregor situation where McGregor flies in from Dublin, enters the Barclays Center, tries to find Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's in the headlining act for UFC 223, finds him in the loading dock of the Barclays Center. He's in a bus. McGregor and his friends, around 10 of them, attack the bus, throw a bunch of things at the bus, like chairs and a dolly. Windows are broken. Two fighters who are competing or scheduled to compete at 223 get injured as a result of, shattered glass hitting them. They get ruled out of the fight. McGregor and his team obviously don't get on the bus. They run away. Later on that evening, McGregor turns himself in. His friend also turns himself in. So that thing is all unfolding, and it's as surreal as it gets. And then come Friday morning, the UFC has this very important main event, Khabib Nurmagomedov against Max Holloway, which is a main event that was put together on, at that point, 4 days' notice because the original interim champion, Tony Ferguson, got injured last week while tripping over a cable while doing interviews on Thursday of last week. Like, that ended up not even being the craziest part of this whole, situation. So Max Holloway steps up, the featherweight champion, and then he can't make weight. He gets ruled out of the fight. The UFC calls upon three other fighters for various reasons. They can't take the fight. And then finally they settle on a guy named Ally Quinta, who's from Long Island, local Rocky story. He takes the fight on 24 hours notice. Conor's then showing up in court. I mean, the thing was just so surreal, Rich. I can't even put it into words. I'm still having a hard time digesting it all. So if you're asking what the headline is, I guess the biggest story to the masses is what happened, to Conor. But it's really these two sort of stories happening simultaneously and us trying to cover them both. That's what I'll remember from last week.
Well, I mean, and I'm trying to pick up what Dana White is putting down in the video that we saw, first blush, that was put out, where I guess he was being interviewed by somebody in the bowels of Barclays Center just after this incident with the bus had happened. And he looked beaten, upset, and saying that he didn't want to do business with Conor McGregor right now. And he used the phrase right now 3 different times. And then later on the weekend, he's saying that that other sports have seen a lot worse. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what the spin is on this. Do you think what happened with Conor McGregor has damaged the sport in some way permanently, Ariel?
So I'll first address your first point because it's a great point. I thought that Dana White, Thursday, Friday, handled this as well as possible. He's in a tough spot. We recognize that. They're not cutting Conor McGregor. He is the biggest star in the history of this sport, so he often has to choose his words wisely when it comes to McGregor. And I thought he did a great job of that. I mean, he was really upset. He said all the right things, disgusted, all this stuff. I mean, it was very clear that he was putting his foot down, I thought. And then come Saturday, as you said, at the post-fight press conference, it seemed as though, he kind of took a step back. And as you said, he was saying, in other sports we've seen worse. I didn't think that was as good of a job. I mean, if you're gonna say this is the most disgusting act in the history of the sport and we're gonna deal with this, all that stuff, you kind of have to stick with that for at least a little more than 48 hours. And it seemed as though time healed that wound. He said that he spoke to Conor and they're in a good place. Maybe there was an agreement. I don't know for sure, but it sounded much better than the first time he said he spoke to him. Agreement maybe that they wouldn't, speak very publicly negatively about this. I thought it was very interesting that they released the footage of what happened. The UFC released the footage. Now, I know there's a lot of people who would say, that's because this was planned. That's because, the UFC was behind it. No, that's not the case. I think that the UFC felt like they needed to put the cards out on the table. But in doing so, they're kind of incriminating him a little more. So I thought that would make things worse between Conor and the UFC. He says that they're in a good spot. We'll see what happens. Conor kind of goes to the beat of his own drum. But like, if you're expecting, Conor to come back and fight now in May or June, he can't. He's involved in this situation. I think at the end of the day, they'll figure it out. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt. But there's a long road ahead here because, there's the next hearing on June 14th. A bunch of fighters were affected. They may sue him as well. Who knows about the employees who were hurt? So there's all kinds of things up in the air. But it was very interesting, at least to me, that Dana softened his stance. I didn't expect him to do that 48 hours later.
Ariel Helwani, the best in the business, joining us here on the Rich Eisen Show after UFC 223. And then Ronda Rousey takes center stage last night in her wrestling debut, and rave reviews all over the place with her saying that she's glad she lost her last two in the octagon because it allowed her to get to this point where she's now a wrestling star. I mean, how does that sit with the UFC world, do you think, Ariel?
So Rich, I could do 2 hours on this story because I think Ronda Rousey has put out the blueprint for every athlete under the sun, every celebrity under the sun, on how to best not deal with, some kind of setback in your career, some kind of failure in your career. She couldn't have handled those two losses worse. It has been astounding to me how poorly she has handled these losses. Every step of the way, every chance that she has gone to at least just talk about the fight. She hasn't even talked about the losses. She has not. I have not heard the word Holly Holm come out of her mouth, and that was 2 losses ago. She ran away from it all. And look, I don't know what she's going through mentally. I don't know. I've never been in her shoes, but I have also seen other athletes falter, quote unquote, choke, not reach the finish line on the grandest stages possible. I've seen Conor lose on the grandest stage possible, and I've seen him show up to the press conference with a nice suit on and handle it, as well as possible. Conor put out the blueprint how to handle a loss. She put out the blueprint how not to handle a loss. And so it is refreshing, a year and a half later from the second loss, 2.5 years after the first loss, that she finally actually says these people's names, that it looks like she's turning the page. I'm happy for her. She did great last night. It's time to move on. But I just think it's amazing to me. I saw her do that car wash with ESPN 2 weeks ago. She can't even say the word MMA. She has all this resentment towards MMA. The reality is she wouldn't be in WrestleMania if it wasn't for her stint as a UFC superstar. The reality is that no one would care about her if she didn't, do what she did in the UFC. So why do you have all this resentment? You lost. Everyone loses. We go through way worse things in life. We get sick. We have deaths in our family. It's hard to feel sorry for someone who just lost and made millions of dollars, and I don't think she recognizes that. So she's handling it in her own way. I'm happy she spoke to Ramona Shelburne. I'm happy she said the things that she said. It's time to move on. But you can't undo the last 2.5 years. To not even address it once, to not speak to the MMA media and make us feel like we're bad people just because we want to talk to you about a single loss in your career, to me is mind blowing. But everyone's different. Everyone's going to handle their things differently.
So tell me, Ariel. I mean, what is the future here? And I want to give the macro view here to make sure I get it all out. Because anytime we talk UFC on this show, Brockman, you could back me up here. It's extremely popular. The video clicks, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
The metrics are better than most sports, no question about it. That said, you could say the 3 most famous MMA fighters right now that have name recognition. One just debuted in the WWE last night. One got let out in handcuffs and is who knows when the heck he's going to fight again in Conor McGregor. Another is John Jones, right? Bones Jones. We all know what's going on with him. When is the MMA going to have somebody that's known for fighting in the MMA and is somebody that you could go and see and follow and be excited about, Ariel?
It hasn't been a very good stretch. It's amazing. Ever since the Fertitta brothers sold the company, they've had an amazing string of bad luck. But I do feel this is kind of, and I'm not going to equate it to my beloved Knicks because they don't know how to rebuild.
Full circle. Look at you going full circle here. Okay.
You like that, right? But the problem is the Knicks don't know how to rebuild. They've been rebuilding for 20 years. The UFC is actually rebuilding quite nicely. They do have some stars. And by the way, none bigger than Khabib Nurmagomedov. He may not be a household name. I know his name is a little difficult for people on this side of the pond to pronounce, but he is a megastar in his home country of Russia. He cannot go outside without people swarming him. He's 26-0 now. He finally got the lightweight title on Saturday. His trash talk is unbelievable. It's very much like Triple G. If you're familiar with the way Triple G talks, it's sort of that, Eastern European broken English, but it's very compelling when he speaks, and he's actually a better trash talker than Triple G. He's the most dominant force in the sport right now. And, if we're able to weather this storm of last Thursday, the biggest fight the UFC can make in the history of the sport is Khabib versus Conor. They both fight in the same weight class. Khabib just got the belt that Conor was stripped of. I mean, Conor flew from Ireland to try to find this man. I mean, there is a storyline there that WWE wishes they could think of. If they could somehow find a way to get these two men to fight each other, it would do 2 million pay-per-views at the least, in my opinion. So there are good things coming. They've got a TV deal coming up. Of course, Ronda is gone. John Jones, in my opinion, will come back sooner than expected, maybe even at the end of this year. And, hey, there are talks that they have a deal in place with Brock Lesnar. And wouldn't that be crazy that he'd be going now from WWE to UFC? So it's not all doom and gloom. It's a bit of a rebuilding time, but I don't think that, as the great New York Knicks guard Michael Ray Richardson once said, the ship be sinking. I don't think the ship be sinking as much as people want to make it seem.
Ariel, great. That's a great walk-off.
You like that, right?
Well, that's a great walk-off. That's a great walk-off. If I didn't have one more question.
Okay.
What did you make of Mayweather saying if he unretires, he comes to the octagon? What'd you make of that?
You've heard of Yogi Berra, right? I'm assuming you've heard of this man, Yogi Berra, the great Yankee catcher.
Yes, sir.
He once said, it's deja vu all over again. And that's what I think of when I think of this story. It's unfolding the same way last year's story unfolded, except this time he's talking about the UFC. It started with us saying, get out of here, Floyd. We want nothing to do with you. This is not happening, the McGregor fight. And then there's a video. And then there's an interview with Jim Gray. And it's like the same thing all over again, almost the exact same time frame. It's unbelievable. And now he's sitting there talking about, fighting at 145 and UFC. My initial reaction was UFC is in a contract year. They need buzz. They need stars, the stuff we were just talking about. Just Floyd talking about the possibility of going to the UFC is great for them. It's worth more than gold for them. But the more this thing unfolds, how can I say that it's not going to happen when we saw the impossible happen last year? It's bizarre to me. I cannot think of a valid reason why in the world he would do this. In my opinion, he stands to make more money as a boxer, which is, the sport that you can arguably say he's one of the greatest of all time. He's 50-0. He's 41 years old. Why in the world would you transition to this other sport that you know nothing about, that you stand to get embarrassed, maybe even seriously hurt, and not even make as much money as in the sport that you're the best at? It makes zero sense to me whatsoever. But Floyd has been a great businessman over the years. Just this, keeping himself in the news, is great business for him. I can't say that it's not going to happen. They keep saying that they're in talks. And so, again, it's like Yogi said, it's deja vu all over again. It's literally unfolding the exact same way with the same players involved. I would be shocked if it, actually comes to fruition. But, and by the way, just for the record, I want to see Conor fight Khabib. I want to see Conor fight the best in MMA. I'm tired of the greatest in our sport, at least the biggest face in our sport, dabbling with this other stuff. It's great that you make money doing this, but it was cool to see Jordan in a White Sox uniform. But in the end, we wanted to see him back in the Bulls uniform. And this other stuff doesn't help Conor's legacy. So I'd love it if he gets one fight under his belt and then maybe goes down this road with Floyd if he's really, desperate to do so. But the Floyd thing isn't going away, and I just can't believe we're talking about this still.
Ariel, great stuff as always. Really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man.
Thank you so much.
Court reporting and fight reporting as you have done in the last week.
Unbelievable.
Thanks for the time, brother.
Thank you, Rich.
You got it. That's Ariel Helwani, reporter for MMAfighting.com on SB Nation, and then check out his MMA Hour podcast, host of the MMA Beat, here on The Rich Eisen Show.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.